When we decided to launch Oh Gross and start this community, it wasn't just because we wanted to talk about taboo topics that people perceive as disgusting, like rashes or bed bugs recently, right?
Or lice.
Or lice, right? But we wanted to explore the word gross, and gross can mean many things. Yes, it can mean disgusting to some people, but also gross is something that can be blatantly obvious, right? Something that has a severity to it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those type of things we're afraid to talk about as well. And that stigma in society can really harm us, right, especially when you're talking about crisis preparedness.
Right.
And especially what we have seen has happened in Los Angeles and is still happening in Los Angeles. We thought it was really important to dedicate a few episodes to talking to the experts who can help us be better prepared and help us get over this idea of, I can't talk about what if because it's bad luck, right? I mean, there that wise tale of like, oh, knock on wood, or don't say it out loud because then it's going to happen. We really need to talk about the worst case scenario sometimes.
To prepare for it.
Exactly. So that you can have a plan to prepare. Let's not be afraid of what if, because what if this happened? How can we prepare for it? Right? To literally have the best outcome in those scenarios.
And why do we feel that it's taboo or uncomfortable to talk about those things? And so we kind of skirt the issue. We just don't go there. And I think that if we can get over that uncomfortability factor and get into the reasons why it's so important to be prepared, it could save lives.
We want to try to take the fear out of it. We want people to be prepared and not fearful of what if something may happen. You want to prepare for the worst. You really do.
And you'll always, obviously, there's always going to be anxiety. There's always going to be fear. But if you can talk about it and be prepared, you're going to really have a better chance of not being frozen, right? When something happens, right? Being frozen and forgetting everything that you talked about. And as we're going to learn today when we talk to our first expert, a dear friend of mine, he is a master public information officer. He is also an EMT, a seasoned first responder. He is a crisis communication expert, and he is just really, really good at breaking things down simply so we can understand the number one thing when you're talking about any of this is starting with clear communication and not being afraid to ask the questions to the right person if you don't understand the information that's being disseminated.
Absolutely.
Oh, gross. The drama's about to end, 'cause gross. Stop asking for a friend. Taboos. Icky's what we do. Just science. Yeah, it's not so weird. Your gross out journey starts right here on Oh, gross.
And once again, I'm so excited that my friend and colleague Mike Jackals has joined us for this conversation.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good,
Hi,
doing
Mike.
great. Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you here. And I want to add one more thing, Mike, before we get into it. You are also the chair of the Florida Association of Public Information Officers and the Florida PIO deployment team. You are probably one of the most effective communicators I know, especially during emergencies. So we're just really excited to have this conversation with you today and also help us understand some of the terminologies that start getting thrown our way during a crisis such as what's happening in Los Angeles right now with the fires.
Well, Kara, first, I just want to express, it's unimaginable what you are going through firsthand with our conversations. There are no words, but certainly, I think everybody in the country and the world is thinking of what's going on there. And it's just so overwhelming. And, hopefully, through communication, people can get factual information to help them get through something like this.
Yeah, because there's a lot of fear that starts to happen, and with miscommunication, fear grows, right? And I think for our listeners who might not know, Mike, can you talk a little bit about what a public information officer does?
A public information officer can be called a PIO for short, an external affairs officer, a spokesperson, regardless of that title. Our job is to get the right information to the right people at the right time so they're empowered to make the right decisions. we have what's called blue skies and gray skies. Blue skies when everything is fine and running smooth. Gray skies during a crisis or disaster. Very different set of communication challenges, especially during gray skies when information or misinformation can impact people's lives and property.
And I think for us, what I think was interesting is that some of the terminology, a lot of us here in LA had no idea what it meant. And still don't. To be honest, I still don't really understand containment. And can you walk us through that? Because that's a big thing that we've seen over and over again on the news is growth or containment of the fires. And you're seeing percentages like 17% or 50%, but yet you're looking at one fire that they're saying is only 30% contained and it's fine. Don't worry about it. And another fire that might be 50% contained and you're still worried about what might happen and how catastrophic it is.
Don't feel isolated because there's a lot of this terminology that I don't understand either. And terminology, and we have an alphabet soup of acronyms and things, and acronyms can mean one thing to one audience or one location or locale. They can have a totally different meaning to a different region or area. So that's why, as a communicator, it's important to speak clearly in simple terms and understandable terms. As far as that, containment and percentages, what you want to know is, what do I need to do? Do I need to get out of my house? What do I need to do? We have another saying. We tell people all the time, see something, say something, stay vigilant. I don't know that people know what stay vigilant means. So it's important for communicators to give them a call to action. What does stay vigilant mean? It means if you see something suspicious, something that looks out of the ordinary, if you see that it's 90 degrees outside and somebody's wearing a heavy winter jacket, carrying a big bag that doesn't look right or look out of place, that's what staying vigilant is. And whether it's preparedness in the domestic security forefront or for hazards, for man-made or natural hazards, these are things that people need to know. And we'll get into talking about having a plan in a little bit, I'm sure.
I had no idea about the 6 Ps of preparedness. Is that a universal thing? That was a big thing that was on the news all over here. That was the first time I learned it, that the 6 Ps of evacuation, of any kind of evacuation, that you're supposed to remember the 6 Ps.
I just read that this morning, actually. Yes.
The Ps are people and pets, number 1. So first you worry about your family and your pets, which makes total sense, and what you need to consider for them if you are going to evacuate from any situation. And then it was papers and phone numbers and important documents. And in a panic situation, when you're looking for your passport or whatever, it was, if you're prepared, you would have a copy, right? You'd have a Xerox copy of all these things, even if you had to leave at the last moment, in a Ziploc or something that would, be set aside. And then prescriptions and things like that was the next P. And then the things that are not replaceable, like pictures, right, that are important to you, to kind of know where that memorabilia might be and what you would kind of focus on. And then it was, of course, like your personal computer and all those kind of things. And then the last thing was plastic, which is your credit cards.
It's important to have a plan and have something rather than just know it. You need to practice it. You need to have it on paper. You need to have it practiced and run through what your preparedness is going to be. But it should be a year-round effort, not just a one and done, but preparedness for all types of hazards, all types of disasters.
But it was interesting because it was all over the news constantly. And I was like, this is the first time I'm hearing the Ps. Like, I feel like if it was 1985, that chart of the Ps would be everywhere somewhere, right on the wall that you would see in public places or in schools, whatever. Again, going back to the digital age, we forget about these things. And also when you receive that information digitally, you probably forget it within a week anyway. Like we're not really reinforcing that, preparedness plans over and over again.
Messaging has to be repeated. It's a repetitive process. And I'll add to your 6 Ps, I'll add a C at the end of it. And that's cash, because plastic may not work.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Absolutely.
How many times I've been in a grocery store and there's a power outage or a spike, the system goes down. You can't buy food. They don't have anything in place to set up a credit card payment or even cash payments.
Yep.
Technology has taken over our lives to such an extent, we're so reliant on it, that the old days of a manual cash register where you could ring up a sale and count change, or the credit card machines that would swipe the credit card
the manual,
old-fashioned way, right? We don't have that. So stores don't have a place. Here in Florida, though, a number of years ago, generators were required in grocery stores and gas stations, as well as nursing homes and nursing facilities. So I think Florida, we're ahead of that a little bit, but still, the most minute disruption of technology can send us into a tizzy.
I guess my husband is right about something then, because he is always telling me to have cash on hand. That's one thing that he is very adamant about, that he always has cash in his wallet. And he always gets on me, Molly, make sure you have cash on hand. So he's right about the cash. So yes.
And this is another thing. When I teach these public information classes, the first thing I say is, number one, plan on technology failing. When you have to communicate, plan on that and work from there.
What's one of the most important things you think that people need to know about getting information out there?
It's important. We call it the golden hour. During a disaster or crisis, information needs to get out within an hour. Somebody needs to say something on that. And this came from the emergency medical services side. We had the golden hour for trauma patients, for people that were critically injured, to get them to a trauma center within an hour of the injury. That's the goal. Same thing with information. And beyond that, to take it a step further, not only should that information come out within an hour, the approval process, getting that information out the door, once you receive that information and it's approved and vetted, it should be minutes to get it out, not hours or weeks.
When it comes to information, what do you think is the key thing for people to know when they're going to be disseminating information? Because we are living in a time where it's not just public information officers who have been trained to give the information, getting information out there. We've got a lot of people and a lot of voices.
Information needs to be simple, clear, and concise. In news releases, it should be a third grade reading level. And during a disaster or crisis, messaging has to be repeated. It's going to take several times for that message to sink in. So it needs to be clear, simple, concise, and consistent.
Just understanding fire hydrants in general. I don't know if you've seen this in the news here. Are they different everywhere? How does a fire hydrant work? Because it's just really been continual. I mean, there's a new theory every other day. And I just want to know how a fire hydrant works.
Well, water has to get pumped somewhere, whether it's the plumbing in your house or to a fire hydrant. And if there's an interruption in that power supply or a heavy demand on the system, then what's going to happen? The water pressure is going to drop, or it's not going to be there when you need it. So, by statute, agencies are required to perform routine tests on their fire hydrants to make sure they're functioning. But I think the enormity of this disaster taxed the system that no system, I don't think, in existence could handle the burden that was placed on it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Are they like run by power then, like by electrical power? Like if the power's out in the area, your fire hydrant won't work?
The hydrant specifically is not, but that water's got to be pumped from a pump station somewhere. Where's your water tower, your reservoir, your water plant? So the water has to get from point A to point B. And so there's electricity involved somewhere along the line, and not in your house necessarily to get that water. But, if you have a well and you're on a well, you're going to have electricity to that well. And what happens if that electricity goes down or the pressure switch on the well goes out? Things that are mechanical can have parts that fail.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
In Florida with hurricanes, one of the other things we message too is after a storm, say that you evacuate, but you left your oven on or something like that, or breakers on, shut your breakers off. Leave your house. That's another thing people don't know.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Because when those lines are energized, if you left your stove on and the power comes back on, what's going to happen? You could potentially have a house fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then people were saying to shut your gas off when you evacuated for the same reasons. Can you walk us through a couple of those things like that people don't know about when they are leaving their home?
Yeah, make sure that, unplug everything. Turn your breakers off. You would shut your propane or your gas line off. Remember, pilot lights could stay on, and if they're not lit, they blow out. You have a gas leak. You come home and there's a spark. What happens?
Mm-hmm.
You might have survived one disaster only to experience another one.
And should you shut your water off as well?
Sometimes when I leave town, I'll turn off my supply to my washer and dryer, because those hoses, if one of those bursts, that's something that's preventable. I can shut that off and avoid having a flooded laundry room.
I did not know that.
This starts with your home personal preparation. Here in Florida, where I am, as you know, we have hurricanes. We have a hurricane preparedness month, but ideally, every month should be Hurricane Preparedness Month. You know what threats, and this is the first thing, know what threats or risks are in your region. If you're prone to tornadoes, if you're prone to wildfires, if you're prone to hurricanes or snowstorms, having a plan is critical. Knowing ahead of time what you need to do and how to be prepared. For us in Florida, hurricanes are relatively easier to message than a wildfire. And here's why. We have lead time. We know because of the technology, we're 7 days away. We're 5 days away. Where the landfall is going to be, yes, it's going to change. Do you need to evacuate? I mean, it comes down to, at the last minute, that's practical, evacuating people if necessary, because the last thing you want to do is evacuate people from one area into another area, and that may end up being the affected area.
Which is what happened here in Los Angeles.
Right.
Yeah, that happened in LA. Yeah.
We have ramp up time for hurricanes, and in Florida, the Division of Emergency Management has meteorologists. They have briefings, communication with the local, state, and federal partners. So we have a good idea before a storm what we need to do and where we need to stage our responding crews and things like that. And they're pre-staged. This was just such a huge event, multiple events with multiple fires. I mean, there's no fire department that could handle single-handedly anything like this. So people get creative too. It comes down to, we saw people that were hiring professional firefighters to, protect their homes. We saw people using portable pumps from their pool. I saw on the news that somebody saved his house and a neighbor's house with an investment of a pump and hose to save that. So, it's about having a plan, being prepared, and you have to, expect the unexpected.
Well, I think too, we were just talking about that people are afraid to talk about disasters before they happen. It goes all the way back to the wives' tale of like, knock on wood, or don't talk about that because then you're going to manifest it happening. There's this idea that we're afraid to really talk about, well, what if the worst case scenario happened? What would we do?
It's that fear and aversion. If you don't think about it, it's not going to happen. But the best thing to do is to have a plan and be prepared. And you have to, plan for whatever hazard may impact you or your region.
And how often do you think that you should be revising the plan or, looking at the plan? Is this like a once a year thing that we should be reviewing just to make sure? Is it, a couple times a year? What do you think would be good for the average people who don't know what to do?
Well, that's a good question, Molly. And let's start by Fire Prevention Week or month happens in October. We tell people, check your smoke alarms, right? We used to be change your clock, change your batteries, but now smoke alarms are 10-year life. So you don't need to change that battery. However, you need to test them. You should be testing them monthly. Do you have medication on hand? Do you have pet food on hand? All of these things that you might need, and it's best to do it over a period of time rather than wait to the last minute and have to run out to a store or get prescriptions and stockpile things, your documents and things that you need to have in hand. With the wildfires, you have zero notice. You need to grab and go. People fled their homes with what they had on their backs.
Right.
A couple of months ago, I think we were having so many earthquakes, those little ones. So we're like, we should probably have an earthquake bag. We forgot about this, that we had put some like clothes in a bag. So when this all went down and we were evacuating, we like grabbed that bag and had no idea what was in it. And when we got to the hotel, we opened it up. It was almost like we were laughing. What we had put in that bag 6 months ago was not going to help us at all right now. What we needed right now. And it was like, oh my gosh, because you forget about it. You forget that you have to keep assessing, and reassessing where you're at or what time of year it is or what you might need. Because it was like 38 degrees where we were. And I think we had shorts in there and some t-shirts. We had done it in the summer.
And beyond the home world, in the business world, and even public safety agencies or government agencies, ideally you should have a crisis plan in place. And if you're not constantly updating that, especially in the workforce environment today with people turnover and things like that, you may have a plan that has contact phone numbers and names of people who no longer work for an agency or that you can't get a hold of. We also say in our business, when something happens, it's not going to necessarily happen at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. It might happen at 11 o'clock on a Friday or Saturday night. So from the business standpoint, and this is a very significant impact to the business community as well. Small businesses don't necessarily have plans, contingency plans for disasters. So this transcends the home to work and our daily life. And with the recent weather events that we've seen, it appears that there's no end in sight. Beyond that, having a plan, you have to practice the plan. All right.
You have to practice the plan.
Have you
Yes.
actually
Yes.
practiced the plan, had a fire drill, or said, what if, is your car gassed up? Your batteries charged for your phones? Do you have all of the cables and charging accessories and what you will need to get by? Because what's your source of information? And here's another one. I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you have a battery operated transistor radio?
I do, because the earthquake in my kit. And that's only because my friend Tom Morris,
I don't.
who you know too, told me I had to have, and I also have a crank. He had one of those cranking things. You can crank it and it gives you power.
So that's something to think about, because when the infrastructure is compromised, when the internet goes down, how are you going to get information? I know for a fact in Florida, there are 12 public broadcasting stations throughout the universities in the state of Florida. And in recent history, none of them have gone down with any of the hurricanes that we've had. One of the things that the Division of Emergency Management in Florida has done is identified that as a communication method for storms. So that's a great resource. And then messaging during blue skies to let people know that, hey, do you have a radio? And they had campaigns where they were giving out radios and things like that. My daughter doesn't even know what a transistor radio is.
Right. Well, and I think, it's interesting that you bring up your daughter too. In general, the panic that ensued with my children was, the truth is, while they've talked about different crises at school and they've had to prepare for things that when we were kids, we didn't have those type of drills, as you know, because of all the school shootings, we in our home did not talk about wildfires. Right? We didn't talk about or fire evacuation in general. It's just something that has not come up. We talk about earthquakes, of course, because it's something we experience a lot, so that you don't have to be afraid, and that there's a plan, and that, and they know like how to get down, where to go. They know for some reason if they're in their room, and it calms them to know that there's a plan. And there was no plan within our house for this. And that created more panic and fear, because especially with children, I think the more information they have, filtered, so it's not, fostering more fear, it's helpful, because then they feel that there's a plan in place.
Just like with adults, there's a call to action. So you just gave me an idea for a good tagline here, plan, don't panic, or prepare, don't panic. Because you need to know what to do. And if you have something to do, it will kick into play. It will be muscle memory. And when you review that plan and practice the plan, it'll be second nature if and when you do need to implement it.
Right. It won't feel as scary.
I have a question, and this might be too broad because there's so many different places or sources of information where people can get the correct answers to these important questions. But are there places where people can go that are good sources of information?
Yes, there are. And for hazards like the wildfires and things like that, or hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever it is, I would say start with your local meaning your city or county emergency management office. They should have all of these templates already there. Some platforms, I know Nextdoor, for one, has a number of resources for communicators to use in templates for preparedness and safety messaging. So it's important to get that information ahead of time. The trusted sources, again, we say the time to build a house is not during a hurricane here in Florida, right? So having that plan, knowing who to go to, it's your trusted agencies. And then the burden is on them, because it's not just about putting out information. We have a process that we use in the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency Public Information Training, which I just taught a class last week in Orlando. And that is a specific process in how we develop and release information. So we gather the information, we verify the information, we identify our audiences, tailor the messaging to those audiences and channels, not just legacy media, your TV stations, newspapers, and radio, but also social media and other resources. Think about this too. When social media is great, it's a great tool in the toolbox for information. However, what do you do when there is no internet? When there is no social media, right? So we've done a presentation called Billboards, Banner Planes, Bullhorns Communicating Beyond Technology. We have experience with this through the storms, and this was before I was even involved in this group in 2004 that the hurricanes crisscrossed the center of the state. And our group was actually using banner planes, flying messaging on banner planes. Fast forward to this past hurricane season, another best practice that the Florida Division of Emergency Management just implemented was, the big Jumbotron trucks that drive around with the sound and those big bright screens? They used those for messaging with QR codes, messaging where people could get resources and items that they needed. So those are mobile, because we've been using those traffic message boards, but you're limited by the number of characters. You have to set it up. They run on gas generators, and you can only have so many characters. So there's a drawback to that while they serve a purpose. But think about this, a dynamic truck that you can place wherever you need it with the messaging that you can update in real time. So this was a best practice that was implemented here this past hurricane season. And the feedback we received on it was great. And my group is involved with directly with our PIO, Public Information Officer, deployment team. And through the network that we have of communicators, we will deploy spokespeople from different agencies from all walks, whether they work for a fire rescue or hospital or a school district, all disciplines. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, they're public information officers or communicators. They have the skill to get that information to the right people. They may not be operating in their normal discipline or wheelhouse when we deploy them, but they know how to get messaging where it needs to go.
I didn't know that. It's so great to have that information.
So don't be afraid to ask the questions.
You have to ask questions. You have to ask questions, and you have to go to trusted sources of information. There are a lot of different forms online, and people are they're hungry for information. So they're going to take whatever tidbit of information they can get and use that information as a baseline. That's why it's important to be out in front of the message, as we say, with forward-leaning messaging. And this starts well before any disaster or wildfire.
And I think for us here too, I never even knew about this thing called Watch Duty. And it was my local news and community said, hey, download this app. It's Watch Duty Fire. And it's going to have the most up-to-date mapping and information, because we were getting a lot of alerts on our phone because I don't know, do they have that system in Florida too, where it's an emergency alert, lets you know if you're time to evacuate or you're close to evacuation?
There are a number of different types of alerts. You probably have on your cell phone when you see that there's an Amber Alert or something like that. That's one that's sent out. There are other platforms that you have to opt into. So you have to subscribe. So it's whatever your municipality, what your emergency management agency or police or fire departments use, you have to opt into those. Now, what happens with that? You get a little app overload when you start getting all of these different apps and all of this different information. So I would say start with your trusted source, with your government agencies first, also news media, and you have to take all of these bits of information and you've got to process what do you think is realistic and what's not. With the advent of social media, there's so much misinformation, well-intended people that are putting information out, but they're not an authority. They don't know. And that can create an issue. And
panic.
Yeah.
And a lot of panic. We had that happen here. It was interesting because when we got our alerts, our new alert system, so we would get sometimes, if we were 2 miles away too, that the evac was happening if it was a couple of miles away. So we would get multiple, and some were meant for us, but some weren't. And it was great because then I found myself going on my local Facebook group and seeing what the neighbors were saying, in our area, and to just decipher. And we'd say, hey, did you get this alert? And if 15 people said, no, I didn't, only one other person did, we're like, okay, let's check into it then, because maybe this wasn't XYZ, because you can't be calling the fire department. They have a job to do, and you got to kind of lean on your community and say, okay, unless it's a 911 emergency, you don't want to be, holding their lines up and taking away from what they need to be doing. So for us, it was really good. Next door in Facebook, but I got to tell you, on Citizen, there were a couple of false alarms because it was just people putting up videos of things that weren't necessarily 100% confirmed.
That information is not vetted, and that's the thing. And no public information officer is going to put out unvetted information. We've seen cases on the web, on social media, of videos that have resurfaced after years that are old videos that make the rounds again.
Right.
And the people don't know that this is not new. This is not happening now. Rumor management is critical for a public information officer. It's not just putting out information. Monitoring information is another task that we do. And we have to monitor the legacy media, TV, radio, newspaper, online, as well as the social media platforms. One case in point, the Boston Marathon bombing was very early on in the days of social media, yet they did an exceptional job at getting information out. And they were the authority for information because they were at the head of the conversation. And in our world, whoever speaks first on an incident or disaster is going to control the trajectory of that message. Think about it. That message, everything else is going to be secondary. So it's important to have that right information and make sure that it's correct.
Just another question about that. So if the internet goes down, social media is down, just kind of like what we saw with the Carolinas, with what just happened during the hurricane season. It seemed like the public was really helping to go from city to city, and they were writing down names of survivors that they could pass along to the next city to kind of get that information passed along to other people. What can we as the public do to help with that?
Yeah, during times when the technology fails us, you have to go back to the basics. The community will rally and step up. We see that a lot, and that's why it's important for government agencies and public information officers to make sure that you have your stakeholder groups identified and engaged before a crisis. It's not just about a social media presence for your agency, because here's one of the things that I always say. Oftentimes, the people who need that messaging or that information the most, they may not be on social media during blue skies.
Right.
They may not have the resources. So are you engaged with different sections of your stakeholder groups? Are you engaged with your faith-based communities? Are you engaged where people have trusted people in the community for information? And that's part of the big picture of messaging.
I think it's important to know where those accurate sources are, because the example I was going to give was several months ago, we had an active shooter in Atlanta, and Molly and I just happened to be downtown in one of our clinic locations downtown, and we didn't know if we were on lockdown or if we could let our staff or our patients, come. And one of the things that we learned from that incident was we need to know who the trusted sources of information are and where to get that information. That's
and to keep everyone calm. To keep everyone calm as well.
Exactly.
In an ideal world, that information should be coming from the lead agency who's on the ground.
Yep.
Depending on what their resources are, if it's a small agency or a large agency, they may not be able to get that information out. But that reverts to what is their crisis communications plan? And do they have a plan in place that information can get out, and that's vetted information? Because if they're not able to put information out, like you said, people are going to get information from other places. Now, generally, most of what goes out on social media is wrong. Most of it gets corrected. The community will eventually correct it. But if you have a situation that's evolving, that's happening now, you need that information now, not in a couple hours.
Right.
And I think the lesson here is that you really have to familiarize yourself with the agencies in your area, right? So that if you see whether it's an active shooter and who's responding, right? Whether it's our situation, with what happened with the fires. I mean, even our neighbors, some of them went up and the way we found out that there was a controlled burn happening was through the community talking to some firemen that were on the ground, right, by us. And they were setting up a command center and saying, hey, we just want to, there's a lot of misinformation going out there. Can you tell us what's going on? And is this fire like, nope, this is a controlled burn. This is what we're going to be doing. That information was disseminated into our community through Nextdoor and Facebook groups. So no one would panic and say, hey, this isn't another fire. This is a controlled fire. But I do think that we've gotten lazy as a society because of social media and because of the digital age of really knowing your local departments and knowing who, right, who are your first responders in your area or who are the agencies, right, that handle these things. Because, back in the day, there was much more of in-person community, right? And now we have just gotten a little lazy. And I think that's a really good point, Mike, is that you have to take the effort wherever you live to figure out who are my agencies around me, where would I get my information from, and know that it would be accurate information that's been vetted.
And Kara, you have that. Being a journalist, you're going to ask questions.
Right.
And that's what
too
you
many
need to
sometimes.
do, right?
Sometimes that's too many.
don't think that this is always going to have the answer for
Right.
you. And,
Right.
and I'm not a sociologist by any means, but what we saw after 9/11 and the whole domestic security threat came on the landscape to that magnitude, and then coupled with the pandemic, think about it. The fire station used to be the pillar of the community. It was a gathering place.
Yes.
That would be the place where people go. But after 9/11, what happened? They were all buttoned up and locked down, and you didn't see anything, right? They were all closed to the public. Nobody, there was no interaction. The only touch point you would have with your firefighters might be when they're at the grocery store or out on a call or somewhere in public. And that's another thing, the fire service as a whole has an emphasis on community risk reduction. That's a fancy word for fire prevention.
Yeah.
I love how you were talking about community. And I just want to say that I will admit that I have learned a lot about safety from my first grader, because the way that the officers that are stationed at his school are so connected to the community. They even help in carpool. And it really makes a difference when we know who's out there and, who's part of what agency. But my children have actually taught me things that I didn't know about safety because they're connected in person. Makes a difference.
I love that.
There's no substitute for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Community risk reduction is that touch point for the kids in schools, for car seat safety, for slip and fall injuries, for all of these things, for AED, automated external defibrillator locations and programs, as well as cardiopulmonary resuscitation programs. You see, I don't like to use those acronyms or abbreviations because not everybody knows what they are. But community risk reduction is something the fire service does practice. So know who your fire department is. They probably have somebody for, public education and outreach. So we've lost that touch point for a lot of this interaction that's still critical, and you can't get it from one of these and knowing.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I love talking to you, Mike, because you're in Florida, and Florida is so used to, unfortunately, with hurricanes, right? Crisis, dealing with it and over and over again. And some of these other states, like earthquake doesn't happen every day, right? An earthquake doesn't have a season. An earthquake doesn't have, a certain time where you're constantly being reminded of what to do, right? And the same thing with fires. So unpredictable.
Relatively speaking, the people that live in tornado-prone areas, they have a plan. They know what they do. They've got to get into their bunker, right? Or get to a place. But the wildfires, you live in an urban area. Kara, did you think that you were going to be facing this?
No, I can tell you that none of us thought that we would be facing this, and not to the extent it was. And I have friends who were evacuated from the Palisades area in Santa Monica, multiple friends actually, who went to Hollywood to then a couple hours later have parts of Hollywood evacuated because a fire had broken out. It was, unprecedented. And no, none of us thought that any of this could happen. And then, trying to get out in Hollywood, just watching that, I'm sure as you guys have done the news, it showed you right there that no one ever thought about, what if I have to evacuate in a moment's notice, right? For fire.
A question about that, when you have to evacuate that quickly, so how much gas should you have in your car? I run my gas tank down, but should I keep it at least half
Right.
all the time? Seriously.
More is better. And another campaign that the Division of Emergency Management in Florida started a couple of years ago was, the half full, halfway there campaign. And again, I'm speaking in terms of Florida, but I think you can interpret this for what your needs are. Used to be, when there was a hurricane in Florida, people would evacuate from one side of the state to the other. There were plans to make the highways one way that go from east to west. It's called Alligator Alley, if you've ever heard of that or traveled it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Make that go one direction. Depending on where the storm was. And people, the other common thought was people said, I'm going to go to Orlando because there's a lot of hotel rooms and it's the middle of the state. Well, you know what happened? We've had storms crisscross the whole state. So the last thing we want is people to evacuate from one storm area to another area that's going to be affected by the storm. So with our building codes, we have very good building codes. We can shelter in place. That means safely stay where you are, pretty much. The one thing that is the pressing hazard is the water or storm surge. We saw that with Hurricane Ian. And those deaths were preventable had people just heeded the warning and evacuated. Complacency is something that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, I
You
was thinking
mentioned
that
a little bit
Yes.
about, oh,
Yes.
it's not going to happen here, or I don't want to think about it. But when your officials, when your government leaders are telling you you need to evacuate or you could die, they mean it. They
Right.
mean it. And so that's the one hazard that really is relative to evacuations is the flooding and also the coastal areas. And people should know their flood zones. Just like you maybe have fire zones, you should know what your fire risk is and evacuations. So it's a system where people know where to go. So getting back to the half full, halfway there, instead of evacuating from hundreds of miles, we tell people you're evacuating tens of miles rather than hundreds of miles.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're doing is you're going from an area that's not safe to an area that is safe, whether it's with family, relatives, friends. So that evacuating, but getting back to the gas, if you're in wildfire season or whatever, at least halfway full. If not, keep it topped off and have a tank and be ready to go. You may not have time. And then where are you going to get gas? I saw cars abandoned in some of the footage that I've seen. Cars were abandoned. They were out of gas. During the
Yeah.
pandemic, we were coordinating our testing
Yes.
and vaccine sites, and people were coming in, they were waiting long times, and they were running out of gas. They ran out of gas. What did that do? It jammed up the whole line
Right.
and caused other problems.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen it in hurricanes here where cars will stall out and they're stranded in the roads, and the roads are blocked. And then, we are then enlisting tow trucks to come in and tow those cars out, forklifts. But you're already responding to a disaster. Now you've created a secondary issue
Right.
that's affecting access for the emergency vehicles and other people that need to get through. So you've just compounded the problem
Right.
unintentionally.
But yeah.
Having that plan. Do you have your gas? Do you have your medication? Do you have your food? Do you have all of those things you need? In our world, we call it a go kit. When we need to deploy on a moment's notice.
Right.
Do we have a kit pre-packed with the essentials that we need basically to sustain ourselves for 3 to 7 days?
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask next, what the time frame is. But yeah, 3 to 7 days is what you want to make sure if you're going to create a bug out bag, as they call it sometimes, right? To take off. Yeah. Well, I think too, the interesting thing is that is that you never know what's going to happen. So we can talk about fire preparedness all day long, and the next thing could happen is an earthquake. Who knows? I mean, a flood. And what needs to be said is that the more you talk about it, the more you're going to know what to do in the situation. So Mike, walk us through like your top things to know and prepare for, if you're in your home for crisis preparedness in general.
Well, I would start with fire safety in the home. Okay. Fire safety first and foremost. A lot of resources, the National Fire Protection Association, nfpa.org. And it starts there. Home safety, smoke alarms. Do you have working smoke alarms in every place in your home, in every bedroom, every living area of your home? Do you have carbon monoxide alarms? Carbon monoxide alarms are very important now with generators here in Florida. We had a big campaign that we worked with the Division of State Fire Marshal in Hurricane Ian, because that's one of the things. When storms hit and people don't have power, they use generators. Generator safety is something, injuries and death that are caused by 100% preventable, 100%. Mm-hmm. In fact, some generators now are being made with carbon monoxide alarms built in. But you would be surprised the number of people that don't know how to safely use a generator. And in fact, most deaths and injuries occur not before or during a storm, they happen after a storm.
Wow.
When people are weekend warriors, they don't know how to use power tools, chainsaws, generators, things like that. That's where I would start with knowing whatever appliance that you're using to make sure that you can operate them safely. So that's the starting point. I would say safety in the home, because if your home isn't safe, then how do you go from there? And then you can go to the other hazards. Kids are being taught, run, hide, fight. in schools. When I was young, we were going out into the hallways and duck and cover for, a potential nuclear attack. But, don't know how much good that ducking and covering would have actually done. But there was a call to action. And just if I may say that, we talk about emergency management and like it's some new thing. Emergency management in one form or another has been around for many, many years. It used to be called civil defense. Think about that. You used to see a yellow and black sign with the triangles, if you're old enough to remember. It said civil defense shelter and things like that. And that was the precursor to emergency management. From the information side, from public information officers really came on the horizon after the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster. There were a lot of messaging and information missteps with that. What was created, the federal government created the Joint Information Center, it's called. Basically, it's the place where communicators like I go to collaborate and communicate with others. So we're getting the same information, one message, one voice, the same information, vetted information. We're sharing information, monitoring information, and people are talking to each other. Because the last thing you want is your government agencies to be siloed, because that information is not going to get out.
Now, I have to ask, in your position, has there been one memorable thing that has happened that has made you kind of pause and say, I want to make sure going forward that this type of information gets out?
The biggest thing I would say is probably messaging when it comes to accidental drownings. Unfortunately, Florida leads the country in child drownings. That's the most common cause of death for children under the age of 5. And like I said about carbon monoxide alarms and everything else, 100% preventable. And that's one of the things that you just, nothing breaks your heart more than something that was preventable that could have been avoided.
And as far as filters go, like in all different types of crises, they say it's good to have like a HEPA filter and things like that, because there can be, leftover things in the air. Can you walk us through, like, is that something that everyone should have in their house and handy as well?
I would say a filter is better than no filter. But this goes down to even whatever your air handler or your system is in your house. Are you buying a 99-cent filter, or are you getting a filter that filters out more of the particulate, the debris that's in the air? So start with that. Read the labels. Get factual information. As far as portable filters, are there people in your household that have breathing problems or medical problems? They would need it more. Probably, I believe the HEPA filter is probably going to be more effective, and it may vary from brand to brand to brand. With when we have brush fires, and we don't have the wildfires, certainly nothing like you've experienced, but living near the Everglades, we do get fires, and they burn the sugarcane fields, and there are smoke conditions that happen. It's important for people that have underlying medical conditions. We'll tell them, close your windows, stay inside. You want to avoid going outside and exposing yourself to the smoke, and limit the time that you need to go out. And N95 masks. That was something that nobody knew what it was until the pandemic. What's an N95 versus a mask? Anything that can keep any of that debris out of your lungs would be something that, certainly worth looking at, especially with people with medical conditions. But stay inside, close your windows, unless you're told to evacuate. You don't want that outside air, that smoke coming in, because if you can see something in the air, you certainly don't want to be breathing it in.
And there's a difference between a burn that happens in an urban area too. I mean, there's other things that end up in the air, the atmosphere, correct? It's literally.
That's the thing. If you've seen different fires, you know what a fireplace smells like when you're burning wood, or just a brush fire, if you will, versus a building fire. We have so many chemicals that are used in construction, in everything that we touch, that they give off fumes, and some of them obviously are toxic. We're dealing with plastics and chemicals and things that you do not want to breathe in. This is why firefighters wear the breathing apparatus. They wear the air packs and masks. It's not healthy to be exposed to these things. They're carcinogens. They can cause breathing issues and other medical problems.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding too that we don't really have a monitoring system for those type of things in the air. We know that we have smog, they can tell you. We know obviously smoke, they can tell us what level, the smoke in your area. But some of these particles, there's no real way to measure and know what is in the air or not. Is that correct?
Well, there are different devices available to the hazardous materials teams from the fire departments in government that, if there's a strange odor call or something like that, there are gas detectors that can detect leaking gas. There are other detectors that can detect carbon monoxide as well as other chemicals too. So they're able to do that, but that usually is a 911 response
Right.
based on somebody smells something. As far as what's outside and burning, unless it's like a chemical plant or an ammonia leak from a refrigeration factory or something like that, something chlorine, we all know what chlorine smells like. I would think you know what natural gas or propane smell like. They have that rotten egg smell, so you know that it's leaking. There are devices available, not necessarily to
The public.
to the public, to the homeowner, but to the emergency services.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot on the internet too, a lot of people buying these devices for their house to try to know if the micro particles are in their home or not. And again, I haven't been able to find any research that says that those are going to work the same way as you're saying the emergency team would have.
I would focus more on the prevention and avoiding the hazard.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for today. And I really just appreciate you coming on and getting this conversation started with us, because we're excited. We're going to be talking to lots more experts. Hopefully people can learn how to prepare better. And talking about this is going to help the community here in Los Angeles, as well as other communities, to be more prepared if they ever find themselves in a catastrophic situation like we did.
Well, thank you for having me. And on a serious note, it was nice meeting you both, Jennie and Molly. Kara,
Nice to meet
again, can't imagine what the people of California are going through right now. I know that there are a lot of responders that I know in different capacities are out there working with the local agencies. This is just a huge, huge response. And this is tragically changing everybody's lives.
I don't think anyone could have fathomed this was going to happen, but I do think it's important to have conversations and talk and to bring the information. That's what I know what we could do, is we can talk about it and try to help our community, help others. And I appreciate you being on that journey with us and trying to help.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so
Mike.
much. If you're listening and haven't followed us yet, please take a moment and hit that follow button. Stay informed and never miss an important conversation that could make a real difference.
Follow us on all socials at It's Oh Gross for updates, resources, and more helpful discussions.
Join us next time for another insightful episode of Oh Gross. Stay safe, and remember, preparedness starts with knowledge.
Oh, gross. That drama's about to end, 'cause gross. Stop asking for a friend, taboos. Icky's what we do. Psoriasis, podiatrist, and pinworms too. It's so gross. No need for strife, because gross. Life is part of life, it's just science. Yeah, it's not so weird. We got the facts, nothing to fear. Oh, gross. It's just science, no, it's not weird. It's just science, nothing to fear. It's just science, so wipe those tears. It's boogers and rash and that sticky scratch. Oh, gross. That drama's about to end, 'cause